dreaming. I was dreaming. Perhaps it may have been but a long-forgotten memory. A dream. A memory. Things remembered when one is asleep. Things forgotten when one is awake. Where the deepest layers of memories become the outmost layers of one's dreams.
2 decades have passed since last you shook the heavens. You may not have risen to the prominence you deserved, but there have been others to pick up the torch and carry on your legacy while you lay dormant. The world is changing, though, and there are thousands of people who miss you, and thousands more who wish to meet you for the first time. It's time to return. It's time for the broken mirror to shine once again.
That dream changed me. That dream was the catalyst for me to resolve what my purpose was. I think I know now. What I have to do.
Hello everyone, I'm Luxin, and this is a video about how it's time to bring back Xenogears. Keep in mind, there's not going to be a new video next week, because I'm going to take 2 weeks to finally get the 10k sub special done and over with, so I can go into 2020 with a clear conscience, and not have that eating up the back of my mind like it's been doing since like March or whenever I hit 10k subs. Also, this video will assume you've either played the game or don't care about story and gameplay spoilers for Xenogears, because, well, I'm gonna need to talk about a lot of that stuff, because I'm pretty picky and opinionated with the things I want to see in a new Xenogears game. Anyway though, Xenogears needs to come back. It's been stuck in limbo pretty much since it launched, and hasn't been given the support and recognition it deserves. I'm not really going to be talking about why it deserves more love, or why it didn't get any more than it did, because that's both on other videos on my channel, and something that you should play the game to find out. Trust me, it's really good. But I'd like to believe that it has a chance of being acknowledged a bit more, and perhaps getting at least a re-release sometime soon. Square Enix, who owns Xenogears, that's why Xenogears characters haven't shown up in things like Xenoblade 2. It's a copyright thing, and it's also Square Enix being Square Enix with its copyright. But anyway, they've been getting a bit better about not only caring about Final Fantasy lately. Gears has been getting some crossover appearances and FF spin-offs. It's been getting more and pretty high-end official merch recently, and just the prospect of getting mad cash by riding on the coattails of 2.5 Xenoblade games coming out in the 3 years around 2020 make me think that now is the most likely time to see some kind of current gen form of the game. I don't mean now as in they're gonna reveal it tomorrow, I more mean now as in, hey, maybe we'll get an announcement of it in like a State of Play or Square Enix's E3 something, 2020, 2021 type thing. This video will be focusing on the idea of a ground-up remake of the game, because I could just say, yes, port the original PS1 release to every current gen platform. That's not a very interesting video. It's more than possible for the original to be ported to PS4, PS5, whenever that's supposed to come out, PC and Switch, rip Xbox, I know, but it never seems to get the ports. It's just how it is. But that's not as big a deal as a remake, even if it's heavily advertised. And again, that would make an interesting video just saying, they should put it on a current gen system, put it on Switch like you did all the Final Fantasy games. Those were apparently decent ports. Do the same thing with Xenogears, and then put it on the PS4, because, you know, the original one was for the PS1. Anyway, though, my main deal-breaker thing when it comes to a remake would be Monolith Soft working on the game in some sort of advisory role, at least. If that doesn't happen, I would not be interested at all. I trust Square a bit more than I let on, and a bit more than I've been making jokes about in past videos, but I do not trust them to handle the vision of Xenogears properly without guidance from a company formed by its original creators. They can definitely handle the actual production of the game, but creative needs to go through Monolith, or I won't trust it at all to be any good. Also, this includes Kunihiko Tanaka coming back as an artist, despite him seeming to have said goodbye to Monolith for good, or at least rely almost entirely on his concept work for the original game. Basically, don't change the art style is what I'm saying. It fits the game and the story so well. Character designs are great. I like looking at them, so don't change them. I'm watching you. This would, of course, come with the downside of the game almost certainly being forced into being a Switch exclusive since Monolith is owned by Nintendo. Also, this whole thing would have to be some sort of Nintendo Square Enix partnership, which they've done before, but the game would have to be on the Switch and only on the Switch, not even being a fake, alright, we're gonna say it's an exclusive, but port it to PC for more money once it does good, like they did with Octopath. It would have to stay on the one console. Now, obviously, this is a deal breaker for everyone who doesn't own a Switch, and yeah, being multiplat is almost always better, but in this case, Switch is probably the best thing for it to be exclusive to. First off, it's already a fantastic JRPG machine, so you're just bolstering something it's already strong with. And also, one of the biggest reasons to make a Xenogears remake would be to capitalize on the success of the Xenoblade games and get people who never played Xenogears but like that series. So you might want to put it on the same console as the Xenoblade games. Just saying. Now, I'm just going to go through a bunch of categories and basically just discuss what I'd like to see out of those categories in a remake. First off is presentation, and I'm actually rather torn on whether or not to go sprites on 3D backgrounds like the original game, or completely revamp things and make it a full 3D thing. On one hand, the sprites gave the original game a lot of character, especially in the context of it being the opposite of Final Fantasy VII, and I would definitely miss all the really good sprite animation, and overall, doing it that way would be a lot more faithful to the original. On the other hand, I just really want to see these characters in 3D. They're the only Xenocast to never get that treatment, and if there's one thing I know I can trust Square to do, it's to make really, really good looking character models, even if they're held back by the Switch. Plus, there's a lot of nothing going on in quite a few cutscenes where they're unmoving sprites on a static background with only text moving on the screen, and that could be both sped up and made much more interesting by redoing them in fully animated 3D. Even a couple panning camera shots in lip flaps is better than no movement at all. A downside of that is, of course, more work needing to be done, having to redo level design and geometry completely for a lot of areas, but that might be for the better sometimes. More on that later. This would probably also involve scrapping the anime scenes for in-engine or pre-rendered with the game model scenes, although they would probably need to be reanimated or remastered anyway, because while they look fine, that is a very low bitrate, and knowing Square, they don't have the original uncompressed versions of those. At all. If they wanted to go full 3D but still have some of the old charm, they could go down the Fire Emblem Pokemon route of still using classic style sprites and portraits in menus and stuff, but that would still leave the death blows, which is the coolest part of having sprites in the battle screen, out of the picture. The last possibility would be to have the overworld and dungeons fully modeled in 3D with fully animated cutscenes and the like, but entering a battle transitions to a 2.5D scene with sprite small characters and model gear/big characters like in the original game. That might be the best of both worlds and one way to do things. If it goes sprites on 3D backgrounds, definitely get the Octopath team to help out on it, and you could probably use that game as a basis. I've seen people say, use the Octopath engine by itself as if that meant something. Octopath was made in Unreal Engine 4. Saying make a game in Unreal Engine 4 means almost nothing in this day and age. You'd rather have to say, build on the framework Octopath laid, and do a similar visual style with that. The backgrounds would need to be different though, normally textured instead of heavily pixelated in order to maintain the style of the original game, and of course, the actual battle and overworld sprites would need to be tweaked a bit to better match the sprites from the original Xenogears. Also, this probably doesn't need to be said, but bump the aspect ratio up to 16:9 so it fills the screen of a modern TV. Definitely add voice acting. Gears is also the only Xenocast who hasn't been fully voiced yet, and they really need it. Just think of the last time you played a Xenoblade game and how much more charm and personality just the battle quips added to the characters, let alone them actually speaking in cutscenes. Do that in Xenogears, basically. Depending on what visual style is used, it might be a bit weird to be fully voiced over mostly static sprites, but voice acting would definitely add a bigger punch to the best scenes. You might want to do a partially voice acted like Octopath, or only the super dynamic scenes fully voice acted and the rest just grunts and stuff. Things other RPGs you're thinking of have done. I would still prefer fully voice acted. The Bravely series was almost entirely fully voice acted, and that was mostly static character models, so it would still work, it just might not be that interesting. There are a few side quests, so it would probably just be the main story scenes, combat, and the speed minigame that are voiced. Basically, what Xenoblades 1 and 2 did, where the story, major quests, and combat are fully voiced, but NPCs and interactions with the party members outside of story or combat isn't voiced. Basically, talking to people on the Yggdrasil wouldn't be voiced beyond grunts and stuff, even though your party members are there as NPCs a lot of the time. Dual audio, of course, preferably not dub titles over the Japanese track like Xenoblade 2 did, but I'll take what I can get, basically. Not sure who I'd want to act in the dub, in reality, just not people who'd be super recognizable from Xenosaga or Xenoblade. I'm thinking American instead of British this time, not 100% sure. The only thing that I know I'd want to hear is one very specific thing. I played 3 houses in between discs 1 and 2 of Xenogears, and when I went back to disc 2, I could only hear Sedith's voice coming out of Satan's mouth, so get his voice actor to do that. That's the only one I'm dead set on. Also, redo the translation completely. The old one was charming and really good in a lot of places, but again, one guy who was really rushed, it was god-awful in a lot of places too. Nothing against the guy, he did what he could in the time he was given, and it's remarkable the game is playable at all, but there are things that need to be redone, and I think they should be. Just retranslate it from scratch, keep only a few classic lines like the really iconic things, and the so bad it's good ones too. My father, you mean my dad, needs to be in all future versions of the game, regardless of how much better the actual translation is of the rest of it. Also, remaster the music with either better samples, orchestration when appropriate, or just uncompress the original tracks, or just use the versions from one of Mitsuda's several concert CDs. Also, get him to make a few more tracks if possible. There are too many dungeons with no music at all, and a few cutscene themes get reused in places that don't fit as well. Xenogears is a fantastic soundtrack, but for such a long game, it's a pretty short OST, and a lot of stuff is repeated when it probably shouldn't be. The sound effects are honestly pretty good for the most part. If they sound as good uncompressed as they do compressed, then you can probably keep them exactly the same, except for cutscenes when new ones are needed. Alright, time for the story. This is gonna be a bit contentious, but depending on how similar to the original game you're going in presentation, and how much Monolith Soft and the original writers of the game are involved with production, I don't know how much of the cut content should be restored in a remake. If you're going completely faithful to the original game, maybe just don't put new areas in at all, since they'd probably stick out a lot. I'm looking at you, Chrono Trigger DS. If you're keeping the same visual style but changing dungeon design, definitely add more cut stuff to Disc 2. The Mass Driver dungeon, 2 more Anima dungeons so you can get in those unused Omni Gears for Maria and Emeralda, and some additional cutscenes. You probably have to slot those 2 extra Anima dungeons in between the first and second ones in the original game, just so you could still have Hammer as the boss at the end of the Let's Get Anima Relics arc. Yeah. And if you're remaking the game completely in 3D, you could easily expand on all of Disc 2 and give it similar pacing to the first disc, completely eliminating that stupid chair in its entirety. Maybe even put the 500-year flashbacks with Lacan. Those were apparently supposed to be playable. Even make those playable. It's probably just some hallway walking, but hey, why not do it? Also, make Ellie's one fight in her Omni Gear playable at least. Give her a full dungeon for it if you really want to make me happy. She got really screwed over by that. Basically, my stance is, add as much as possible while still maintaining the original story and pacing, but don't put in perfect works material that wasn't supposed to be part of Episode 5 to begin with, unless it's part of some sort of out-of-universe database and doesn't prematurely spoil the story when given to you. Also, don't make too many major changes to what's already there. What is in the game as is has its problems, but after all this time, I can't see any significant changes to that being received well, so it's best to just add cut stuff instead of altering in an attempt to fix what's already there. If there's something that was planned to be a specific way but had to be changed because of time constraints, then sure, change it back to the original idea. As long as it's part of the original plan for the game, changing it to more line up with that is good. If one of the original writers wants to come in and tweak something, or you want to add a non-canon crossover / post-game area, fine, but keep Square original story content as far away from my Xenogears as you possibly can. Also, finish the Star of Tears music video that was cut for the original game, and put it as a second title screen movie in addition to the actual intro scene, or play it as an OP for the game after Faye leaves Lahan for the final time. Now, gameplay-wise, this is going to sound extremely weird coming from me, but don't turn it into a Xenoblade game. I'd prefer for some semblance of the original combat system to remain, and I'm honestly not sure how to do that in real time, unless you basically turn it into a bad 3D anime fighter, or Kingdom Hearts. We got a lot of both of those already, and neither of those is Xenoblade, so you can't have the Xenogears combat system and it being similar to a Xenoblade game. Don't try to conform Xenogears to the Blade series. The Blade series is the Blade series. It's good on its own merits, and I don't think it should retroactively determine how Xenogears should play in the future. The story also just doesn't lend itself as well to open-ended level design as the Blade stories. It's a lot more dungeon-heavy than all of those games, which makes sense since the world came before the story for the Xenoblade games, so it's better to keep it as a more linear, more traditional style JRPG. The nearest things I can compare to are Dragon Quest XI and Ni no Kuni if you're going full 3D, and the original Xenogears if you're not. I'd like for random encounters to be removed wherever possible and turned into visible enemies, except maybe out on the overworld because I'm not sure how you do that. Unless you're going full Blade, just make touching an enemy transition to a separate battle screen where combat takes place. Dungeons might need to be redesigned just to accommodate this change, because a lot of the visible enemy encounters are either unavoidable or you have to talk to them to fight them, so I'd like there to be a middle ground where you have to actually skillfully move around, and you got an analog stick this time instead of just a D-pad, so make it good that way. Speaking of dungeons though, they need to be redesigned just in general. They're easily the weakest part of the game, a lot of them are extremely annoying and just not good, and should be made to look a lot less samey and confusing. Just make them designed better, make them more fun to play through unless they're specifically not supposed to be fun, make them less mazes of identical looking hallways is basically what I'm saying. I actually like the implementation of puzzles, you could even put more in. They're good and they fit well in the context of the game, but some of them are a bit too obtuse and should probably be simplified a bit so they don't completely wreck the pace. I don't want to spend 30 minutes on a puzzle like I did before. Also, speed up everything. The biggest barrier to entry for the game is honestly just how slow everything is. If going full 3D, voice acting and animated scenes are actually going to be faster than mashing through text in the original game, and if you're not going 3D, dear God, speed up the text crawl speed. It's slower than the slow option in most other games, and there's no way to increase the speed of it at all. Just doing that would shave like 2 to 3 hours off of a playtime of the game. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. Speeding up combat animations might be a bit meh, because it would probably mean shortening a lot of the cool stuff like death blows, but at the same time, a lot of animations are like 10 seconds for no reason. If everything is made more fluid, but also faster, it'd still look fine, most likely, and fix the pacing of fights. Also, usual quality of life stuff, make the menus better, bring that stuff up to current standards, that's not a big deal, that's what you want to have in a game like this, at the bare minimum. Next, increase the difficulty, please. Most of the game is spamming death blows on foot, and turning on booster and spamming death blows on gears. Even without the broken builds. You could basically just button mash your way through most of the game. The only times I died were on the final boss and a couple other gear bosses. that are really easy if you bought the right parts, some of which are permanently missable, and kind of hard if you don't. And I didn't. So, yeah, that's not really the best, fairest kind of difficulty. The first thing I can think of to make it harder is change the battle system to the type of ATB where time doesn't freeze when your character's gauge is full, so enemies can attack if you take too long menuing. For quality of life, also add the option to cycle between characters with a full gauge, so you could just set up stuff better. The other option would of course just be make enemies stronger, make them take more damage, make them deal more damage. I feel like enemies just need to be given better stats overall, because a lot of times they do almost no damage at all, and you can kill them round one, even without Satan in your party, so, you know. If you do that, if you make enemies harder, remove insta-kill attacks, because nobody likes those, and use less cheap difficulty methods instead. Even turning insta-kill to reduce to 1 HP is a lot fairer than insta-kill. Also, you should adjust the character stats so people like Rico aren't borderline useless. Choo-Choo can stay useless, though. I think it would be a good idea to add an option via some plot or non-canon BS to rematch Alpha Veltal whenever you want. It's the only super boss in the game, you only get one shot at it, and you're not fully prepared and are missing Faye for that, and you're probably putting most of your resources into Faye, so, you know, it would be cool to have another chance to do that. Miscellaneous stuff, make the overworld a bit bigger and more explorable if you go 3D. Give the player more access to it during Disc 2. Like, because of Solaris stuff, a bunch of the world is hidden from people's memories until Disc 2 starts. But then, you don't actually get to go to the overworld until the end of the game, and there's like one area you haven't been to already by that point, and you can't go to most other places. Kind of annoying. You don't need to have secret areas or sequence breaks. Maybe just some small areas with treasure chests or nice views or something, but it would just be cooler to explore more of it at a time, make it more open the times you're supposed to traverse it to get to the next place. One other contentious thing, I don't think it would be right, even in a remake, to add the cut party members back into the game. I already am asking for 2 or more dungeons to be added, and to expand people who are already there. That's enough. It's going to be enough trouble balancing 9 characters. You don't need to add more, and I don't think it would be a good idea for people's characterization, and for the story as a whole, to make more people playable. Plus, it's harder to make hard the more options you have, and I want the game to be made harder. If Ramses and Margie join as guests for certain bosses or short segments, that would be cool. Those are the 2 who came closest to becoming playable, and didn't, and they both have big reasons to become playable at various points. So, I think that would be okay, but there can't be any more permanent party members. I'm sorry, it's just too much. Their characters and their personal arcs can and should be expanded in additional scenes that are added, especially in Disc 2. I just don't think they should be playable. What should be playable, though, is a new super boss. If you give 2 Anima Relics to M and Maria, there's actually still 1 left over that's not accounted for by any gear in the game. Invent a new Omni gear to go with that, make it a super boss. Also just add a few more super bosses, put in whatever Diablos gear actually is, more of Deus's defense weapons besides the ones that are just in the final dungeon. Do stuff like that. I like it when games have super bosses, and this one should, because it needs to get difficulty somewhere. Also, of course, adjust the level scaling to account for the new areas, which will keep people from being over or under leveled. And, you know, that fixes difficulty too. And quickly, marketing. Go big. Advertise this as much as you possibly can to people you think would be interested. You have Nintendo and Square Enix on this. Square Enix, I've seen Final Fantasy 15 ads on the New York subway, and Nintendo is actually being pretty smart with its ads this generation, so you can make something happen there. Advertise it like you would Xenoblade 2 or Octopath. Lean on the Xenoblade connection, assuming it's Switch exclusive. Have a tagline involving the predecessor to the Xenoblade series returns after 20 years. Something like that. Get people who wouldn't play it normally because they only like Xenoblade to associate it with Xenoblade, so they play it. Also, bring back Stand Tall and Shake the Heavens for the US marketing campaign. Like, you have to do it. And that will be a wrap. I know it wasn't a very visually interesting video, but I guess not visually interesting was a word that I used a lot, so it makes thematic sense at the very least. But anyway, yeah, this was really fun to write, but it also took a really long time to write, so that might be why it's not the most interesting to look at. But hey, it's cool. Thank you for watching. Thank you for patrons. Until next time, this is Luxin signing off. Goodbye.